So Napoleon had turned populist. That's what we discussed in our previous video. Now, what was the new eyewash he was preparing for the masses? He created workers' bodies. But mind you, these bodies can't voice their demands as they like. These have to be authorized by the state. So these can be mouthpieces of the state. These can't actually represent the grievances of the workers or point out what the state was doing wrong. It can't challenge the existing political organization of the state, the society. The guiding idea was that the workers were already defeated. It was a monarchical system. But then the king was doing some sort of philanthropy by enabling the workers' voices to be brought forward in front of everyone. The dream was to create a passive society free of class struggle. Okay, the tool adopted was to offer moderate freedom. As I said, it appeared like a philanthropy. In reality, it was just a reaffirmation of the dictatorial tenure of the ruler. In 1864, a new law was passed which enabled freedom in moderation. Working class organizations were allowed under tight monitoring. But an indirect result that this entire thing had was that socialist policies now resurfaced. Even under those claustrophobic operations under state approval or state monitoring, whatever could operate with the state approval, it still somehow geared socialist policies to be brought in front by those workers who were associated with the organizations. In the public sphere, workers' organizations started to grow, and ultimately the energy was directed against the Second Empire itself. The demands for radical redistribution of material resources and the end of rule by owners of private property, all of these were started to be voiced out. This was also accompanied by the opposition, direct opposition to Napoleon's dictatorship. One of the things that was happening in the background of these internal politics was the Franco-Prussian War. And in this war, one of the greatest figures of European politics was directly involved against France. And that was Otto von Bismarck, who we know was an architect of the Realpolitik, Realpolitik of Germany. Something that has given us the political nomenclature for a very long time to come. So, in the Battle of Sedan, which took place on 2nd September 1870, France was defeated by the Prussians, and that's a long thing that we would cover in another video. But what happened was, Napoleon was defeated, he was imprisoned, he abdicated from the throne. As the news of the overthrowing of Napoleon spread, people were now demanding a republic. They were done with monarchy. They didn't want Napoleon, they didn't want his progeny or anything to operate. Now all they wanted was a new republic. So what happened? On 4th September 1870, the organizations of the poor captured the municipal authority over Paris. And since in France municipalities were called communes, we would have the Paris Commune come up. Those who supported this commune government were called the communards, and one of the foremost of their leaders was Auguste Blanqui. In Blanqui's writings, we get the ultimate articulation of the commune ideology, which was a mixture of the radical Jacobin model of insurrection from below, so grassroots politics which would be radical and revolutionary. It is mixed with the anarchist idea of instant abolition of private property. In this commune politics, we also get major feminist figures like Louis Michel and André Leo. They demanded three things. These three things were Emancipation of working class women. So working class women has to get their rights, voting rights, property rights, all of these things have to be fought for. Secondly, secular education for girls. Girls have to be sent to the school. Cooperatives, laws, and all these organizations has to be gender sensitized to ensure equality for women. And finally, the abolition of Code Napoleon, which was something that the original Napoleon had brought about. It was filled with conservative anti-woman principles that denied women divorce rights, that was, having some draconian things allied with abortion of women. It basically was stifling for women. So these three things were demanded by Michel and Leo, that women has to be sent to school, patriarchal codes has to be abolished, and working class women has to get their rights, because they were toiling on the field and they had literally no rights. They brought about the French Revolution but were ultimately ousted out of this entire discourse of rights. One thing that happened was the National Guard, which was actually a group of armed citizens comprising of the poor people of Paris, formed the city's defense against the Prussian invaders who came in since the Franco-Prussian War ended. So, when we study this, we have to keep one thing in mind. Following the victory at Sedan, the Prussian army encircled Paris. See, Paris was encircled. The Prussian army had a long history of suppressing the rebel poor, so they were extremely cruel to the poor in Paris. On 19 September 1870, the crisis finally precipitated when the extremely poor workers, they were actually fighting to protect Paris from the foreign aggressors. You must wonder what the actual French army was doing. They were moving on the command of the Versailles government, who thought of nothing other than the protection of their own interests, which was also against the workers. The National Guard was a volunteer army of temporary soldiers created out of ordinary citizens. Its roots reached back to the People's Armies created through the French Revolution of 1789, the Jacobin Republic, which defended the popular democratic social gains of the revolution. In 1870, what happened was the provincial government in Paris was forced to draft many of the working poor people into the army. So soldiers were not enough in the French army. France was already going through, a depleting coffer. So the ordinary men were now being drafted. Working men volunteered because, inclusion in the army meant they can feed themselves and their families. The poor were now armed. This is a significant thing. Why did the Paris Commune, become such a serious threat to the ruling clique of France? That's because it was filled with workers who bore arms. They had pistols, they had fire weapons. That's why they were a threat. The National Guard, defending the city from Prussia, swelled enormously within weeks to 350,000 men. They formed neighborhood battalions. Women were also attached to the National Guard units as auxiliaries. They supplied food, drink to this volunteer army and offered first aid to the wounded soldiers. Many of these women learned to use guns and they were fighting on the field as well. The working class unemployed, including men, women and children, the volunteer army therefore offered them a living. Women worked in manufacturing arms, production of ammunitions, sewing uniforms. So their role as supporters of these men and occasionally also as fighters, it's imminent in the commune, and it's a phenomenal quality that we can see in these workers in Paris, that everyone was so spirited in defending their city against the aggressors and also against the extremely draconian ruling class of their country. So some of the makeshift workshops were established for the manufacture of war equipments. Governmental resources were considerably weakened. These were produced through money raised from street collection. So the arms that were being manufactured in the workshops. The government could not pay for them, and people were voluntarily giving up resources for the manufacture of arms. Now it was turning into a total war. The besieged city tried to fight the Prussian invaders, but the Prussians had created a siege. What is a siege? When you surround the enemy in a fort or in a city and you wait for food, resources and patience of your opponents to deplete, that's a siege. And that's exactly what was happening in Paris. The Prussians were causing this. Now, in this crisis, the Republican leaders hailing from the bourgeois society, they negotiated a peace treaty, and this was seen as an ultimate defeat by the Parisians. They wanted to fight, they didn't want a treaty, but the bourgeois was too afraid, and they were straight away negotiating a peace treaty. A new National Assembly was formed, and this was royalist in orientation. Why was it royalist? It wanted the king to come back. It wanted a monarchy. The poor resisted this system because they were fighting for what? For a republican form of government where some kind of people's voice would be, present in the parliament. So, the conservative republicans in it were against the social interests of the workers, as they had been in the previous revolutions of 1848 and the Second Republic. It decided to abandon Paris to Prussians and shift it symbolically to Versailles, the old French headquarters associated with the Bourbon monarchy. It was abandoned. This government was as determined as the Prussian authorities to crush the poor who had been instrumental in organizing the resistance to the siege of Paris. Now, here we will see three blows. There are three blows brought about against the poor by the representative of this ultra conservative royalist National Assembly, by Adolphe Thiers, who was their leader. He represented the Third Republic. So first of all, he stopped paying the National Guard. So the National Guard was not paid their wages. Remember, these are poor people who are now armed. They are here to defend their city, but also they are here because they were unemployed. They needed money. That's why they voluntarily joined the army. Being in the army, they were getting some wages for defending the city. But now, Thiers stopped paying them. Now, when they are not being paid, they still need to pay the rents for their houses. If the government can ease the rents, that would have helped. But no, Thiers won't do that. So rents were not eased. The Parisian poor felt these measures were designed to make them suffer even more after a spell of war-induced hardship of the severest proportions. So a confrontation between the poor in Paris and the new government that was set up at Versailles was now inevitable. So in March 1870, the government launched another program. It tried to disarm the National Guard. An uprising of soldiers, poor women and workers of various descriptions now began. The crowd wanted the formation of a municipal government or a commune. So these three were the blows that caused the Paris Commune of 1871. What happened? The Central Committee of the National Guard, who were basically the workers in arms, they announced elections for the commune. Other cities and towns in France also showed signs of upheaval. But before this revolutionary tendency could spread everywhere in France, the Third Republic managed to suppress it. What happened? Paris was the nerve center of the revolutionary Paris Commune. And this was slowly spreading to other parts, other towns. So the first thing the Third Republic under Adolphe Thiers did was to seal Paris off. Previously the Prussians were sieging it. Now their own government was sieging Paris, sealing it off from the outside world. It was in Hotel de Ville, a building which housed the municipal headquarters of Paris, where the Paris Commune was declared by the National Guard and the workers therein. It adopted the red flag, which was hoisted on top of the building, representing people's power. Now, of course, we have to keep in mind the role of workers in the commune. But how did the Third Republic respond to this Paris Commune apart from the siege? They launched a campaign of disinformation. The communards, or the supporters of the Commune, were vilified as bloodthirsty rebels, as enemies of private property and of safety and security of the citizens of France. The press, which was controlled once again by the big business and the bourgeoisie in France and across Europe, it came to use communard as a slang. So that was the negative connotation attached to the supporters of the Commune. One thing about them, about the Commune, was that they were just citizens. They had arms, but they were not equipped to fight with the government or with a foreign army. When it comes to the spirited defending of their city, they were doing it. But by and large, they were ill-equipped to actually stand against their own government for a long time. So what happened was, it was not practical for them to go into a long drawn-out civil war with the Versailles government. It lacked an effective military strategy to bring the bourgeois government to its knees. More time was spent on chalking out social principles which would revolutionize society. So, it did not plan the defense properly. It also neglected the financial side of running the government. They allowed the bourgeoisie to remove the banks and financial resources out of Paris. And that was the main cause, the alienation of capital away from Paris by the businessmen and the ruling clique. That was the main reason why the Commune could not survive. But it functioned in a mass democratic manner. They were busy discussing social and political issues. Its social program was egalitarian. They tried to abolish private property. It formed workers' cooperatives to run workshops and factory units. People celebrated by wearing red scarves and red flags. I told you how red was a sign of workers' power. Women were empowered and became active everywhere in the Commune. The Commune tried to weaken patriarchy. Schools were set up to provide education for workers and for poor children. Even in such a time, opposition to death penalty was openly sounded in the Commune. So, it was giving a sign of a proto-democratic order. It was not entirely a democracy, but it was a proto-democratic order. And the Vendôme column. What was the Vendôme column? It is still there in France, by the way. It had been built to celebrate French colonialism and triumph of French imperialism elsewhere. It had the statue of Napoleon dressed as Julius Caesar, a famous Roman personality. Just as the Caesar had destroyed the Roman Republic and created a dictatorial empire, Napoleon had also destroyed the French Revolution's goals of liberty and democracy by establishing an imperial dictatorship. The entire legacy of autocracy and imperialism was rejected by Paris Commune. The destruction of the column on 16th March was a public festival. The radical socialist artist Gustave Courbet organized it. The destruction of the column represented rejection of war and empire building. Place Vendôme was renamed that day as Palais International in solidarity with people oppressed by imperialism everywhere in the world and as a tribute to working class people. Now, the Commune was bombarded, In May, the Commune was bombarded, the last line of this slide. It was then attacked by Versailles troops and Prussian army. The Prussian army, by the way, was bribed by the Versailles government to take down the crowd, because we know the Prussian army had a legacy of crushing down rebellions even within Germany. So the communards, men, women and children fought a very spirited battle, but they finally, by the end of May, were all defeated. This entire event, the cruelty that was meted out to the communards, was an indication or was a sign perpetrated from these, ruling classes. It was a punishment to the workers for daring to rise. How dare you rise and how dare you want to have a better life in your own country? That was what they were saying. So dead bodies of workers were strewn across streets. It was a bloody week. Thiers boasted of teaching them a lesson. 20,000 to 25,000 Parisians were murdered without trial. Anyone sporting a red handkerchief was shot by the Prussians. The dead were buried in mass graves. And among 270, including women, communards were sentenced to death and executed. Many were deported to the New Caledonia, which was a penal colony in Australia. Penal colony refers to those places where criminals or convicted people are usually deported out from one country. So just imagine, Australia was a British penal colony already. So whatever British offenders, they were all brought to Australia and allowed to, roam free there. So this was something that would have ideally endangered the law and condition of these colonies, which was of course not exactly European places. These had their own indigenous people. So the indigenous people suddenly one morning would see that thousands and thousands of British criminals are coming and roaming scot-free in their country. So I am not going into the grave injustice that went into polluting a country with all these rogue elements, but that's welcome to the colonial part of history, which is a period of grave injustice, of course. And the others of the Paris Commune, the communards, were either arrested or executed. Now, how was the new order restored? The old order, the pre-commune order restored. Republican system of governance was adopted by the new National Assembly at Versailles. This was with reluctance. The bourgeoisie was still comfortable with the monarchical system and it wanted more rights for itself. They were afraid that republicanism would once again unleash the forces of social revolution. The government was afraid to return to Paris and did not dare to do so till 1879. Just imagine, 9 years it took them, the ruling elite of France, to return to Paris. That was the power of the poor workers protesting and demanding their rights. Only in 1879, the upper classes, the ruling clique, could return back to Paris. And many ideological measures were taken. What was done? To overthrow the egalitarian mass democratic order, the communards created a great white church was built in Paris to atone for the so-called crimes of the commune at the very spot where the communards had resisted the Versailles troops. The Vendôme column, which was uprooted by the communards, it was rebuilt. Church education, which was based upon a patriarchal class-based system, it was restored over secular education. The police were given more power so they could kill people without trial. Opposition press was restricted, so press restrictions were imposed. But Paris showed signs of reclaiming the memory of the suppressed commune. In May 1880, many Parisians marched in large numbers to the cemetery where communards had died fighting the royalist forces. In June, a humble cobbler who was a veteran of the commune was elected to the local council. Though there was no possibility of another commune, ex-communards started working through different left and socialist parties. So those against the commune hated it as an example of working class democracy, but the memory of commune could not be suppressed easily. Commune could not complete what it wanted to do, but we cannot say it was entirely unsuccessful because it inspired later revolutions like the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 in Russia and the Spartacist Revolution in Germany. They had in them that little flame that never dies. This is something that a painter had said. His name was Renoir. Okay, now let's end this chapter by talking about what historian Eric Hobsbawm has to say of the commune. He argues that commune was a workers' government, first of its kind, but unfortunately it could not be broadcasted to other parts of France and eventually to the world. French Revolution could be broadcasted, so we know about French Revolution so much, even sitting in India. But this commune was confined only to Paris, therefore it was destined to fail. Okay, now Karl Marx, in his Civil War in France, a book, he spread the idea the commune was the first symbol of a modern working class government. The class composition of the arrested communards pointed at the fact that commune represented the rule of the workers. The majority of the participants in the Paris Commune were ordinary workers. It was the first attempt of the proletariat or the working people to capture power and run their government, their own government. So it represented a socialist revolution. Its socialism was drawn from utopian socialist tradition of Europe, which dominated working class politics in 19th century from the pre-1848 period. This strand of socialism represented the dream of self-governing cooperative units where workers will produce and distribute the fruits of their labor equally. So in a way, the sans-culottes or the ordinary workers of Paris, they were representing their power in the Paris Commune. So here we are. With this revolutionary event, we end a significant part of the modern French history, where the commoners, they wanted to, envision and live, take active steps towards forming their own government, and they were unapologetic to their ruling classes who were oppressive. So their ideals continues to inspire us even today. Thank you.